Number 1. The valley where billionaires go broke on purpose. Every single day, someone in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, sells a mansion for cash, and the buyer never even asks for a mortgage. Not because they're rich. Because in this valley, being merely rich isn't enough to get a seat at the table. Picture a place tucked between the jagged peaks of the Teton Range and the muddy banks of the Snake River, where elk graze in golden fields, just minutes from private jets, landing at one of the only airports inside a national park in America. Welcome to Jackson Hole, a 60-mile-long valley in northwestern Wyoming that has quietly become the wealthiest zip code in the entire United States. In 2026, Teton County has a median household income north of $200,000, and yet almost half the workforce commutes in from Idaho because they can't afford to live where they work. The average home price sits above $3 million. Wyoming charges 0 state income tax, 0 estate tax, and one of the lowest property tax rates in the country, and that single fact has turned this sleepy ranching town into a magnet for hedge fund managers, tech founders, and old money families who used to summer in the Hamptons. But here's what will keep you watching. How does a county with less than 25,000 permanent residents host more billionaires per capita than Manhattan? Why do the actual working people, the ranch hands, the ski instructors, the waitresses at the $1 million cowboy bar, sleep 3 to a trailer in a hidden tent city just outside town? And why did one lawmaker call Jackson Hole a beautiful place for rich people to avoid taxes while everyone else gets pushed out? Before we dive into this strange American paradox, tell me where you're watching from and what your local cost of living looks like. Drop your city and your rent or mortgage payment in the comments below. I read every single one. Number 2. The tax loophole that built an empire of mansions. If you want to understand why Jackson Hole exists the way it does today, you have to understand one boring, unglamorous fact. Wyoming has no state income tax, no corporate income tax, no tax on out-of-state retirement income, and no estate tax whatsoever. For a family worth $50 million, that isn't a minor convenience. That's millions of dollars saved every single year just by claiming residency in a county that most Americans couldn't find on a map 20 years ago. Combine that with some of the lowest property tax rates in the country, and you start to understand why so many ultra-wealthy families quietly move their primary address here while keeping homes in California, New York, and Florida. The locals have a name for this. They call it paper residency. A billionaire might spend 6 weeks a year actually breathing Wyoming air, just enough to satisfy residency requirements, while their accountants save them a fortune. Meanwhile, the same tax structure that benefits a private equity founder does almost nothing for the woman cleaning his guest house because she doesn't have millions in capital gains to shelter in the first place. There's an entire quiet industry that's grown up around this loophole. Wyoming allows something called a dynasty trust, a legal structure that lets a family shield assets from federal estate tax essentially forever, passing wealth down for generations without the government ever taking its usual cut. Because of this, Jackson Hole has become a magnet, not just for people who want to live somewhere beautiful, but for the actual paperwork of enormous fortunes. Law firms have opened satellite offices in strip malls a few blocks from the town square. Their only job, they're managing trusts for families who may only set foot in the state twice a year. Some of these firms have grown so large, they now employ more people than the local hardware store or hair salon. All of them working quietly behind unmarked doors, managing spreadsheets worth more than the entire county's annual budget. Ask a longtime local what those offices actually do, and most will just shrug and say, trust stuff, because even the people who've lived here with their whole lives have learned not to ask too many questions about the money moving through town. This is the quiet engine underneath everything you're about to see. The wolves, the elk, the cowboy bars, the ski slopes, All of it sits on top of a tax strategy so effective that Forbes has called Teton County a legal tax haven hiding in plain sight inside the Rocky Mountains. But the money didn't just show up because of taxes. It showed up because of something the valley has that no spreadsheet can replicate. Number 3. The view that made land more valuable than gold. Stand anywhere in Jackson Hole and look west. The Teton Range explodes straight out of the valley floor, with no foothills to soften the blow, rising over 7,000 feet in less than 3 horizontal miles. Geologists will tell you this is one of the youngest mountain ranges in North America, still actively growing, still actively earthquaking the valley floor lower every few thousand years. That raw, dramatic silhouette is why Ansel Adams photographed it obsessively in the 1940s. It's why the National Elk Refuge sits at the base of town, hosting the largest wintering elk herd on the planet, sometimes 11,000 animals bedding down within sight of downtown. It's why Grand Teton National Park and Yellowstone sit practically stitched together at the valley's northern edge, giving Jackson Hole something almost no other wealthy enclave in America has: unspoiled, federally protected wilderness that can never be developed, right next door to some of the most expensive real estate on Earth. Because roughly 97% of Teton County is public land, national park, national forest, or wildlife refuge, only the remaining sliver is buildable. That artificial scarcity, wrapped inside one of the most photographed landscapes in the country, is exactly why an acre of buildable dirt here can cost more than an entire neighborhood in most American cities. The mountains aren't just scenery, they're the reason the math works at all. Locals sometimes describe it as living inside a postcard that's slowly being sold off one frame at a time. Every ridge you can see from downtown is protected. Every valley floor you can actually build on is finite. And when supply is frozen by federal law, while demand keeps climbing from people with essentially unlimited capital, prices don't rise gradually. They rise in violent, sudden leaps, the kind that can double a home's value in 18 months without a single renovation. But scarcity and tax breaks only explain why the rich want to be here. What actually happens when they arrive is a completely different story. Number 4. The ranch that turned into a private club for the ultra-rich. Drive 15 minutes north of downtown Jackson, and you'll pass through a stretch of land that looks, from the highway, like any other stretch of sagebrush and split-rail fence. What you can't see from the road is that behind those fences sits some of the most exclusive real estate in the Western Hemisphere. This is where you'll find compounds owned by media moguls, tech founders, and at least one former vice president, sitting on parcels that can run past $100 million for the land alone before a single log cabin-style mansion gets built on top of it. Locals call this corridor Billionaires Row, and realtors will tell you, off the record, that some of these properties never officially sell. They change hands through private trusts and shell companies, specifically so the sale price never becomes public record. The architecture out here follows an unspoken rule. No glass towers, no modern minimalism. Everything gets dressed up to look like a rustic hunting lodge, even when the cabin has an indoor pool, a home theater, and a 2,000-bottle wine cellar. It's wealth, wearing a costume of humility, blending into the landscape so it doesn't look like what it actually is. There's an entire underground economy built around servicing these properties year-round, even when the owners are absent. Private security patrols circle empty driveways at 2 in the morning. Snow removal crews clear half-mile-long driveways before dawn, so the gravel underneath never even gets a chance to show. Some estates keep a full-time caretaker on staff purely to run the taps once a week and keep pipes from freezing in a house that might see its owners for a total of 3 weeks a year. And the people who maintain these properties, the landscapers, the property managers, the private chefs, often can't afford to live within 45 minutes of the houses they take care of. Which brings us to the part of Jackson Hole that almost never makes it into the glossy magazine spreads. Number 5. The hidden tent city, 15 minutes from the Four Seasons. In the summer of 2023, a photograph went viral, showing dozens of tents pitched in a national forest parking lot just outside Jackson. These weren't campers on vacation. These were teachers, hotel housekeepers, and seasonal ski resort workers who simply had nowhere else to sleep. Here's the brutal math locals live with. The median home price in Teton County now sits above $3 million, but the median wage for service workers hovers around $20 an hour. Even a modest one-bedroom apartment, if you can find one, routinely rents for $2,200 to $2,800 a month. Do the arithmetic, and you'll understand why nearly half of everyone who works in Jackson Hole commutes over Teton Pass from Idaho, a drive that can take over an hour each way in a winter storm, past a stretch of highway locals grimly nickname the Pass of No Return, after the accidents that happen there every single year. The town has tried to fight back. Deed-restricted workforce housing units get built with lottery systems attached, income caps, and resale restrictions designed to keep them affordable for locals instead of investors. But demand outstrips supply by a factor of 10 to 1. And every winter, the same story repeats. Restaurants close early because there's no staff to work the dinner shift. Ski patrol positions go unfilled. A doctor's office in town once posted a job listing that included, in the fine print, must be willing to live in employer-provided dorm housing, because there was simply nowhere else in the valley they could afford to put their own physician. Some employers have gotten creative out of sheer necessity. A grocery store in town converted an unused storage building into staff housing, stacking bunks 4 to a room, just to keep enough cashiers on the schedule through ski season. A local hospital built an entire apartment complex specifically for nurses because there was no other way to guarantee coverage on the night shift. Teachers in the local school district sometimes live in staff housing, owned by the district itself, an arrangement almost unheard of anywhere else in the country because there simply isn't another option within driving distance. This is the quiet contradiction sitting underneath every ski magazine cover and every most livable town in America ranking. The valley that markets itself as an escape from modern life has created one of the most severe housing crises in the entire country. But the story of who actually lives here goes back much further than billionaires and hedge funds. Number 6. The cowboys who never left. Long before Wall Street discovered Jackson Hole, this was cattle country. Mormon settlers pushed into the valley in the 1880s, and by the early 1900s, dude ranches had sprung up across the valley floor, places where wealthy Easterners paid to live like cowboys for a summer, riding horses and sleeping in rustic cabins. That dude ranch tourism economy never really disappeared, it just got a lot more expensive. You can still ride a horse through the same aspen groves that Owen Wister described in his 1892 novel, The Virginian, a book many historians credit with inventing the entire American cowboy mythology. The Jackson Hole Rodeo still runs every summer Saturday night, and locals will tell you with a straight face that it's one of the last places in America where you can watch a genuine working cowboy compete for prize money before he goes back to fixing fence the next morning. Ranching families who've been here 5 and 6 generations still exist, but many of them survive today, not from cattle, but from conservation easements, essentially selling the development rights on their land to land trusts in exchange for permanent tax breaks, ensuring their ranch can never be subdivided into vacation mansions even after they're gone. It's one of the strange truths of modern Jackson Hole. Some of the oldest, least wealthy families in the valley are the ones actively keeping the billionaires from paving over everything that made the place special in the first place. Talk to one of these ranching families, and you'll hear a very specific kind of exhaustion in their voice. They love the land the same way their grandparents did, but they've also had to become experts in conservation law, land trust negotiations, and estate planning, just to hold on to a property tax bill that keeps climbing every time a hedge fund manager buys the ranch next door for triple its assessed value. Their wealth is real, but it's almost entirely locked inside dirt they'll never sell, while their bank accounts often look closer to a schoolteacher's than a billionaire's. And every winter, the descendants of those same ranching families still gather downtown for one of the strangest rituals in the American West. Number 7. The Elk Antler, Archers, and the Town Square Shootout. Walk into downtown Jackson's Town Square, and you'll see 4 massive arches made entirely of naturally shed elk antlers, tens of thousands of them collected every spring by local Boy Scouts from the National Elk Refuge and auctioned off each May in a tradition that's run continuously since 1958. Every single night, from Memorial Day through Labor Day, a group of costumed locals stages a fake gunfight in the town square at 6:30 p.m. sharp, a tradition that's been running since 1957, making it one of the longest continuously running stage shootouts in the country. Tourists in Patagonia vests stand shoulder to shoulder with families who've lived here since statehood, all watching grown men in cowboy hats fake shoot each other over a parking dispute that never actually happened. It sounds silly, written out like that, but it's also oddly sincere. This is a town that still genuinely performs its own frontier mythology every single night. Not entirely for the tourists, but because the identity underneath the money is still, stubbornly, a ranching and rodeo town that happens to also have some of the most expensive real estate on the planet, sitting 3 blocks away. Behind the antler arches, though, the town square tells a second story if you know where to look. The same storefronts that once sold saddles and feed now house art galleries selling bronze sculptures for 6 figures and boutique stores, where a single flannel shirt costs more than a week's groceries for the family living in. Workforce housing across town. Both worlds occupy the exact same 3 blocks, existing side by side without ever really acknowledging each other. But nowhere does that identity collide with modern wealth more dramatically than on the mountain itself. Number 8. The tram that costs more to ride than most people's rent. Jackson Hole Mountain Resort sits at the base of Teton Village, and its aerial tram, nicknamed Big Red, climbs over 4,000 vertical feet in roughly 12 minutes, one of the largest continuous vertical rises of any tram in North America. At the top, Corbett's Couloir waits, a chute so steep and exposed that skiers sometimes have to jump off a cornice just to enter it, and it's regularly ranked among the scariest ski runs in the world. A single-day lift ticket here can run past $250 during peak season, and a basic hotel room in Teton Village during Christmas week can hit $1,500 a night before you've eaten a single meal. Meanwhile, the lift operators, the ski patrollers checking your boundary rope, and the kids working the rental shop are often the same people commuting from Idaho or living in that employer-provided dorm housing 3 towns away. There's a strange split personality to the mountain because of this. During the day, it's genuinely one of the most challenging, most respected ski resorts among hardcore skiers worldwide. A mountain that locals will argue, with real passion, is tougher than Aspen or Vail. But by night, Teton Village empties out into private chalets that sit dark and unused 11 months of the year, owned by families who fly in on private jets for a week at Christmas and another week in February, then leave the whole compound sitting empty, heated, and maintained by a full-time staff for the other 50 weeks. Locals who've worked the mountain for decades describe a strange loneliness to Teton Village once the holiday crowds clear out. Entire blocks of multi-million-dollar condos go dark by early January, their owners back in California or Texas, leaving only the maintenance crews and a handful of year-round employees rattling around a village built for thousands. It's one of the few places in America where you can stand in the middle of what looks like a bustling alpine town and realize you're almost completely alone. This pattern of extraordinary wealth sitting mostly vacant, while the actual working community squeezes into whatever housing is left, shows up again and again once you start looking for it. Number 9. The wolves, the grizzlies, and the fight over what wild actually means. Just north of town, Grand Teton National Park and the Bridger Teton National Forest host one of the last fully intact, large predator ecosystems in the lower 48 states. Grizzly bears, reintroduced gray wolves, mountain lions, and wolverines all still roam here. Genuinely wild, genuinely dangerous, in a way that almost no other place with this much wealth concentrated nearby can claim. This creates constant, real friction. Ranchers who've lost cattle to wolf packs argue bitterly with conservationists who point out that wolf reintroduction in the 1990s helped restore the entire valley's ecosystem, famously changing the very behavior of rivers because elk herds stopped overgrazing riverside willows once predators returned. It's one of the most studied examples of what ecologists call a trophic cascade anywhere on the planet, and it happened here, in this valley, because wolves came back. Meanwhile, million-dollar homes sit close enough to bear country that bear-proof trash cans are mandatory by county law. Not a suggestion, an actual ordinance with fines attached. Locals joke that Jackson Hole might be the only place in America where a hedge fund manager's Range Rover and an actual 800-pound grizzly bear might cross paths in the same grocery store parking lot, and it's not really a joke, it happens. Wildlife biologists who study the area will tell you something that sounds almost poetic. The same wealthy homeowners who fund conservation nonprofits to protect the grizzly population are, statistically, more likely to have a dangerous encounter with one, simply because their multi-million-dollar homes sit further out on the fringes of town, pushed right up against the exact wilderness corridors the bears use to move between feeding grounds. Money buys you the view. It doesn't buy you distance from the animals that come with it. This collision of raw nature and raw money is, honestly, the entire personality of the place in one sentence. But it's the food, strangely enough, that tells you the most about who this valley actually serves. Number 10. The restaurant with a $30 burger and the taco truck that feeds the town. Walk into downtown Jackson and you'll find restaurants where a bison ribeye runs past $80. Wine lists stocked with bottles that cost more than a month of someone's rent, and a steakhouse that's been quietly feeding celebrities and CEOs since the 1970s without ever needing to advertise. But drive 15 minutes south to the town of Alpine, or over the pass into Victor, Idaho, and you'll find a completely different food economy. Taco trucks parked outside gas stations, feeding the actual construction crews and hospitality workers who build and staff those same downtown restaurants. A carne asada plate costs $12, not $80, and it's often better food, cooked by someone who came here specifically because the wages, even at fast food places, run higher than almost anywhere else in the Mountain West, precisely because of how expensive it is to live within striking distance of Jackson. Grocery prices tell the same story. A gallon of milk can run nearly double what it costs in Denver, and produce sometimes sits on shelves for days longer than it should because the supply trucks have to climb mountain passes just to reach the one full-size supermarket in town. Locals have learned to stock up whenever they cross into Idaho for cheaper gas and cheaper groceries, turning a routine shopping trip into a genuine cross-state border run that happens every single week for thousands of families. This is the actual daily rhythm of the valley that no tourism brochure captures. Wealth concentrated so tightly downtown that a burger costs more than most people's daily food budget, sitting a short drive from a working-class economy built entirely around commuting into that wealth every single morning and driving back out every single night. Every summer, that daily rhythm gets interrupted by one of the strangest economic gatherings on Earth. Number 11. The economic summit that moves markets from inside a national park. Every August, central bankers, finance ministers, and economists from around the world fly into Jackson Hole for the Kansas City Federal Reserve's Economic Policy Symposium, an event that's been held here since 1982, chosen specifically because the setting, inside Grand Teton National Park, encourages what organizers openly call informal, unguarded conversation among people who otherwise spend their entire careers being extremely guarded in public. When the Fed chair speaks at this symposium, markets around the entire world move within minutes. A single sentence about interest rates, delivered from a lodge overlooking the Tetons, can shift trillions of dollars in global asset values before the speech is even finished. For 1 week a year, this valley of 25,000 people becomes, quite literally, the single most economically important location on the planet. For that same week, hotel rooms that already cost hundreds of dollars a night double or triple in price. Private security details fill up every available rental car in the region, and local restaurant owners quietly admit that catering the symposium's private dinners can account for a meaningful chunk of their entire year's revenue. It's a strange, almost surreal 7 days, where a valley built on skiing and elk watching briefly becomes the epicenter of global finance, before quietly going back to being a small mountain town the following Monday. It's a strange, almost poetic detail once you sit with it. The place that built its modern identity on escaping the pressures of money and markets is also the exact place where the people who control global monetary policy choose to gather, precisely because the mountains make it easier to think clearly about money. The scenery that attracts billionaires looking to escape their spreadsheets is the same scenery that helps the people who write global monetary policy escape theirs. Number 12. The school teacher who commutes 90 minutes each way. To understand what all of this actually costs a real person, meet a hypothetical but entirely typical Jackson Hole teacher. She loves her job, she loves the mountains, and she genuinely can't afford to live in the town where she works. So every morning, she wakes up before 5, drives over Teton Pass in the dark, sometimes in whiteout conditions, arrives at school by 7:30, teaches a full day, then drives the same 90 minutes home in reverse, often after dark again in winter. She's not an outlier, she's the norm. Local school districts have had to build their own subsidized staff, housing purely because there was no other way to retain teachers against a private market where a single family renting out one guest cottage can charge more per month than most of the district's entire salary scale. Nurses, firefighters, and police officers face nearly identical math, and some public agencies now openly advertise employer-provided housing as a recruiting tool, something almost no other city in America has to do just to keep basic public services staffed. Every few years, the county commissions another study on the housing crisis, and every few years, the conclusions land in roughly the same place. Wages would need to double, or home prices would need to fall by more than half, for the math to work out for an ordinary working family. Neither of those things is likely to happen anytime soon. So instead, the Valley keeps patching the problem year by year, one dorm building and one lottery unit at a time, never quite catching up to the gap between what the mountains are worth and what the people who work in their shadow actually get paid. That gap between what the county's income statistics show on paper and what it actually feels like to be a working resident here is the whole story of Jackson Hole, compressed into a single commute. This valley didn't get wealthy because the people living and working here got paid more. It got wealthy because a small number of extraordinarily rich people chose to claim residency here, park their money here, and let Wyoming's tax code do the rest, while the actual community that keeps the lights on, the school teachers, the ranch hands, the ski patrollers, the line cooks, quietly gets priced further and further out of the valley their own families may have lived in for generations. Which leaves you with the real question underneath everything you've just watched. Would you trade a smaller paycheck and a punishing commute for a chance to live inside the most beautiful valley in America, knowing you'd never actually be able to afford a home there? Or would you rather live somewhere ordinary, somewhere affordable, somewhere nobody's ever heard of, and simply visit places like Jackson Hole as a guest, instead of trying to survive there as a local? If this story opened your eyes to what low cost of living really means, once you compare it against places like this, hit like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments what your monthly rent or mortgage actually is right now. I want to know exactly how your city stacks up against a place where the wolves might genuinely be more affordable to deal with than the housing market.